Greetings and welcome to my new calculus channel. My name is John Gabriel. And in this video today, what I'd like to do is to talk about Book 7 of Euclid's Elements. And we'll start with the definitions. Now remember, in the previous videos, we discussed Book 5, the most important book of Euclid's Elements. And we did both the definitions and the prepositions, but what we need to do now is find out why indeed Euclid did what he did in Book 5 and then what he did in Book 7. So with that in mind, I think the best place to start is not on one of the other books that I haven't yet covered, like Book 4 and Book 6, but to continue on with Book 7. So let's begin. Now, as you'll recall, by the way, for those of you who missed the series on Book 5, you can download a very large article which contains all the propositions and definitions that were covered in those videos. So it's all on academia.edu, and you can download it here, and I'll place a link to this article in the details section. So now Book 7 is mainly about the transition from ratios to measures of ratios. That is, numbers. That's right. See, a lot of modern academics, in fact, in this day and age, in fact, when I say modern, I'm talking about very recently, such as Susanna Dankso at MSRI and many others, didn't really understand Euclid's Elements. So if you go to this video here and you watch from the beginning, you'll see that she says that there is no such thing as a perfect unit, and that Euclid had a problem with that, and that he also had a problem trisecting angles and calculating cube roots. And every one of those statements, by the way, was actually false, because the Elements is not about constructions and bisecting angles and creating perpendiculars and circles and all that. It's not about that. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Just hear me out. I do know better. I am a genius and I know better than anyone else. The Elements is just a template for systematic thought, for valid systematic thought, nothing else. The geometry came out of it, and algebra and mathematics and everything else doesn't mean that it was created to be about mathematics. Its main goal was measurement, the establishment of a methodical, systematic way of measuring. Okay, so in order to do that, the ancient Greeks left no stone unturned. They wanted to begin right at the very beginning. And, of course, the very beginning is a prologue which I've written, which, if the ancient Greeks did write such a prologue, it was never found anywhere in the history of man. Okay, but you need to read my prologue before you study the Elements, because you won't understand the Elements without the prologue. And then, in order to understand how we got arithmetic and all its properties and what have you, you need to study Book 5, because that is on ratio and proportion. And then, naturally, the next step is to go on to number theory, right? And so, unfortunately, the first definition of Book 7 is vague. And I don't think Euclid spent enough time thinking about this definition. He failed to produce a well-formed definition, which has resulted in misguided mainstream thinking and a ubiquitous ignorance of the number concept for the next almost 2,300 years, just before I arrived. Now, the abstract unit, the first definition of Book 7 should be this: the abstract unit and or equal parts of it is the generalization of a geometric unit or any other magnitudinal unit. Okay, in other words, we create an abstract unit whose size is irrelevant, and we talk about measure in terms of that unit, not in terms of line segments or weights or masses or areas or anything else. Because if you need to do something in physics, you'll naturally add a physical unit. So both arithmetic and all of its operations are transferred intact to algebra, and you can learn more about it in Book 5 of the Elements. It's about 67 pages long, so you'll need possibly a few weeks to understand it. So in measurement, we deal only with abstract numbers that have no unit. They have no physical unit size or anything else. They are dimensionless, okay? They are dimensionless. So, for example, when we calculate area in mainstream mathematics, we usually talk about square units, but those square units are actually dimensionless because they're abstract units, okay? And of course, there is a general definition of area which I introduced some years ago, and an area is really just a product of two arithmetic means. So it's not even stated in square units or any other form whatsoever. So in order to understand the concept of number, one has to well define it. And I think you've seen this expression many times. A number is a name given to a measure that describes a magnitude or size. This is what happens in Book 7, starting with definition 1. So in algebra, numbers are composed of abstract units and or equal parts of the abstract units. Since there are innumerably many ratios of line segments, it would be impossible to talk about their measure in algebra unless said measures are generalized through the abstract unit. So in geometry, these ratios, as you see in here, are proportional, but they're decidedly not equal because the antecedents, these are the antecedents, the line segments appearing before the colon, and it's that way by convention. They're not equal, okay? This line segment is not equal to this line segment, okay? It's in proportion, but they're not equal. So in algebra, we concern ourselves only with the actual measure of a ratio. And now if you remember in Book 5, I talked about quotientness, which comes from a word I made up, which comes from a Greek word pilikotita. Okay, or proportionality. So it's not its quotientness or proportionality per se. So the measures of these ratios are half and 2/4 respectively. But since the abstract unit has no size, a half is equal to 2/4, right? Because the abstract unit is used and size is irrelevant. So Euclid presents yet another dismal performance in his definition of number, which we see in definition 2. So in definition 2, he says a number is a multitude composed of units. Well, first of all, I don't know where Heath got this and a, because there's no and in Greek, in the Greek text. It's not there. So he just took the liberty of putting that there, but it's not there. So what Euclid meant is that a number consists of abstract units and or equal parts thereof. Now you might say, well, how can you talk about equal parts thereof if it doesn't have a size? It does have a size. It has an abstract size. Okay, and because the properties from Book 5 are transferred intact, we assume everything that we've done there and do it the same way, but with this, without regard to the actual size of the unit. We don't care about ratios anymore. We only care about the measures of the ratios. So many highly stupid mainstream academics, including Heath, interpret this to mean that numbers start with 2, which is obviously nonsense, because if they had understood the concepts of multiple and factor from Book 5, they would have known that that's definitely not the case, and that's not how it was meant. So definition 2 is the entire definition of what is commonly known as a rational number. Of course, the adjective rational is redundant because number implies rationality, hey, that's where you get number from ratios. Okay, the word rational comes from the word ratio. So the definitions that follow tell us more about the properties of numbers, not just integers or counting numbers, as the ignoramuses of mainstream mathematics think the past few hundred years, but every possible number, okay? So in their grand ignorance, mainstream academics have called other things numbers which are not numbers, like complex numbers and square root of -1 and all that laughable garbage. But of course, I'm not going to spend time with that, and I think I'm not going to do definition 3 or any other definitions today. I'm going to leave it at that. I just wanted to introduce book 7 today. And so what I'll do is I'll try to get through the whole of book 7, starting with the definitions and the propositions, and show you how all of it ties in with book 5, and that Euclid really didn't have a problem, by the way. As I mentioned earlier, this dear little lady here made several false statements, or whoever posted this. It was possible to trisect angles, and Hippias had done it. And by the way, I'm not talking about using compass and straight edge. They were trisected in a very ingenious way, which most of you, I'm afraid, do not have the intellectual ability to understand. And this was over 2,300 years ago. And of course, calculating cube roots was a piece of cake for mathematicians many decades before Euclid. So Euclid didn't have a problem with that either. If you watch this video here, you'll see that she spends a lot of time on absolute rubbish, like constructions and talking about her views on what is a perfect unit or a God unit, misunderstanding the entire context, the entire point of Euclid's elements, just like all the other mainstream academics that I know who've never understood the concept of number. Book 7 is very important. It's the second most important book of Euclid's elements. Why? Because it gives us the ability to measure, and we can derive all the other sciences from Euclid's elements. Okay? Chemistry, engineering, architecture, and everything else that we need, because that's where measurement is established. And you'll see also that most of the facts that you know about algebra also come from book 5 and book 7. Okay, so book 5 we've already done, and we'll carry on with book 7 sometime in the near future. I'm John Gabriel. This is a New Calculus channel. Till next time, goodbye.